Hello and welcome, dear listener. Settle in and allow the weight of your day to soften, to gently release its hold. There is nothing for you to do now but to rest, to breathe, and to let your mind drift. Tonight we are traveling back in time, not to a battlefield or a revolution, but to a place of almost unimaginable splendor, the Palace of Versailles. When you picture Versailles, your mind likely conjures images of sunlight streaming through the hall of mirrors, catching the facets of 1,000 crystals. You see gilded furniture, painted ceilings that rival the heavens, and sprawling, manicured gardens where fountains dance for the pleasure of a king. You see silk gowns, powdered wigs, and the graceful, practiced bows of the nobility. This is the Versailles of legend, the golden stage upon which the drama of the French monarchy played out. But our journey tonight will not be on that stage. Instead, we will slip behind the heavy, brocaded curtains. We will leave the grand halls and venture into the spaces in between, into the shadows and the corridors where the real work of the palace was done. We are going to explore the quiet world of the servants of Versailles, a world of sweat, of silence, and of intricate social traps that were just as dangerous as any court intrigue. Because for every noble enjoying a lavish feast, there were 100 hands that prepared it, served it, and cleaned up after it. For every leisurely promenade in the gardens, there were countless hours of unseen labor that made it possible. Imagine yourself there, not as a guest, but as a part of the vast, invisible machinery that kept the palace alive. This journey will take you into the underbelly of all that glamour, into a life where your day begins long before the sun, where your feet ache from the cold stone floors, and where a single misplaced word could mean losing everything. We will walk through the daily life of a servant, feeling the itch of a uniform and the chill of a pre-dawn morning. We will come to understand the man who created this gilded prison of protocol, King Louis XIV. We will even wander through the secret passageways and whispering walls that hid so much of the palace's true life. And finally, we will contrast this world of toil with the silken, perfumed existence of those at the very top of the Versailles food chain. There is no need to hold on to every fact or follow every detail. This is a story to drift upon. Let the words wash over you, a gentle current carrying you back to a time and a place far from your own. So take a slow, deep breath. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable. Our journey to the other side of Versailles begins now. Imagine the darkness. It is a deep, profound black, the kind that exists only in a world without the glow of electricity. It is the absolute darkness of a pre-dawn morning in the 17th century, hours before the first hint of gray light will touch the sky over the Isle de France. The air in your small attic room, tucked high under the eaves of a palace wing, is thin and sharp with a damp cold. You sleep not alone, but packed into a narrow chamber with several other servants, the air thick with the communal sounds of slumber, the soft sighs, the occasional cough, the rustle of straw as a body turns in restless sleep. The space is so tight that you can feel the warmth radiating from the person next to you, a small comfort against the pervasive chill that seems to emanate from the very stones of the palace. Your mattress is a simple straw-stuffed palliasse laid out on the floor or on a crude wooden frame. It offers little comfort. You can feel the individual stalks of straw, lumpy and unyielding beneath you, pressing into your back and hips. Over time, the straw breaks down, becoming dusty and less resilient, a constant reminder of its humble nature. Your single blanket is of coarse, heavy wool known as serge. It's a meager defense against the chill that radiates from the stone walls and seeps through the gaps in the roof slates. You can smell the dampness, a permanent scent of old stone and mildew, along with the faint, human smells of unwashed bodies and rough-spun fabric. This is your world, a stark contrast to the perfumed chambers below. Your personal possessions are few, perhaps stored in a small wooden box at the foot of your pallet. A change of underlinen, a simple wooden rosary, maybe a worn, folded letter from a family you haven't seen in years. These small items are your only anchor to a life outside these palace walls, a private world no bigger than the box that holds them. There is no gentle awakening here, no slow stretching as the morning light fills the room. Your day begins with a sound. It is not the song of a bird, but the clang of a distant bell, a relentless metallic call to duty that cuts through the silence. This is the sound that signals the start of your day, a summons from a world of gilded clocks to a world that runs on iron bells. It is the sound that separates the sleepers from the workers, the masters from the servants. For a fleeting moment, in the warm cocoon of sleep, you might forget where you are. But the bell, cold and insistent, pulls you back to reality. There is no option to ignore it. To be late is to be noticed, and to be noticed is to be reprimanded. You swing your legs over the side of the simple cot, and your bare feet meet the floor. The cold is a physical shock, a jolt of raw reality that travels from the soles of your feet up through your entire body. There are no rugs here in the sprawling servants' quarters known as the communes. There is only rough, uneven stone, or perhaps splintery wooden planks, floors that seem to hold the very essence of the winter night. You dress in the gloom, your movements practiced and economical, honed by months or years of this same routine. Your fingers, still stiff with cold, fumble with the simple ties and buttons of your uniform. It is not made of silk or velvet, but of a sturdy, functional wool or linen, its color denoting your specific role and rank within the vast household. A footman's livery might be a deep blue or red, edged with simple braid. A chambermaid's dress is a dull gray or brown. It is practical, yes, but it is also a constant source of low-level discomfort. The fabric is rough against your skin, a persistent, scratchy reminder of your station. The seams are thick and abrasive, the cut designed for durability, not for comfort, and it never truly loses the faint, sour smell of sweat and labor. Maintaining it is another chore. You must brush the wool meticulously to remove dust and debris, and polish the simple metal buttons until they offer a dull gleam. Any tear or stain must be mended immediately, by your own hand, by candlelight, after your long day's work is done. And then, if your station requires it, there is the wig. For the male servants in more visible roles, the footmen, the valets, this was a non-negotiable part of the uniform. It is not the elaborate, towering creation of a courtier, powdered to a snowy white with expensive, scented starch. Yours is a simpler, more functional piece, often made of horsehair or goat hair, and powdered with cheap flour that sometimes attracts weevils and gives off a faint, musty smell. Still, it is heavy. In the summer, it will be unbearably hot, trapping sweat against your scalp and causing rashes. And it is relentlessly, maddeningly itchy. As you settle it onto your head, perhaps over a thin linen cap, the coarse hair pressing against your scalp, you understand that this is a symbol not of your importance, but of your place within the great machine of Versailles. You are part of the scenery, and the scenery must be uniform, powdered, and proper. Before the real work begins, there is a brief, functional meal. You join hundreds of other lower-ranking servants in a vast, cold hall with a vaulted ceiling, a space that feels more like a cellar than a dining room. The meal is meager, a hunk of dark, dense bread, so hard it could be a weapon, and a cup of watered-down wine or sour ale, served from a large barrel. You eat standing, or sitting on a rough-hewn bench. There are no pleasantries, no lingering conversation. The bread is tasteless, a dense fuel for the long hours ahead. You chew it slowly, methodically, the act of eating as much a chore as it is a comfort. The sounds in this hall are muted, the scuffing of hundreds of pairs of simple shoes on stone, the scraping of benches, the low murmur of a few exchanged words, but very little talk. A shared exhaustion hangs in the air, a common understanding that energy is a resource to be conserved. Your first true task of the day begins as you join a silent procession of other junior servants, moving like shadows through the still darkened corridors. You carry no candle. Light is a luxury, an expense to be spared, and you are expected to know the way by heart. Your hands brush against the cold, damp plaster of the walls to guide you. In this consuming darkness, the grandeur of the palace is lost. The gilded carvings are just menacing shapes in the gloom. The vast, frescoed halls are cavernous and echoing voids, their daytime splendor sleeping under a blanket of night. You traverse a labyrinth of hidden passages, narrow, winding staircases known as déroulements, so tight you have to turn sideways, their stone steps worn into smooth, sloping hollows by the passage of countless hurried feet. These are the arteries of the palace, unseen and unknown by the nobles who inhabit its heart, a secret geography of labor. You arrive at the doors of the royal and noble apartments, a world away from your attic room. Here your first and perhaps most humbling duty awaits. It is a task known unofficially as the gros travail, the heavy work. It is the emptying of the chamber pots. Inside each lavishly decorated bedchamber, a member of the French court has spent the night. And with the night comes the necessities of the human body. The palace, for all its magnificence, had notoriously inadequate plumbing. The chaise percée or commode, a beautiful piece of furniture that hides an ugly reality, was the solution. Your job is to enter the room as silently as a breath of air. You push the heavy door open a crack, listening for any sound of stirring, and then slip inside. The air is warm, thick with the lingering scent of last night's perfume, pomade, and the sleeper's breath. You do not look at the figure swaddled in silks and lace within the grand, canopied bed. You avert your eyes. You are a ghost, a function, not a person. To look upon the face of a sleeping noble would be an unforgivable intimacy, a violation of the sacred space between your worlds. Your eyes find the commode, a fine piece of marquetry that hides a porcelain pot. You open its doors, and with practiced hands you retrieve the vessel. The pot is heavy. You must carry it with a steady, practiced grace, your body held rigid to avoid a spill that would be a catastrophe, a source of unimaginable shame and certain punishment. The terror of a slip, of the sound of shattering porcelain on a marble floor, is a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. You back out of the room, closing the door with a barely audible click, and begin the long walk. You carry your delicate burden down long, echoing corridors and hidden stairwells, your focus entirely on the task. You join a line of others on the same mission, a silent, solemn parade of young men and women, each carrying the intimate refuse of the aristocracy. The hierarchy is present even here. The pots from the king's own chambers are made of solid silver, carried by a designated senior servant. The high nobility have Sèvres porcelain, decorated with delicate, hand-painted flowers. Lesser courtiers have simpler pewter or earthenware. You head towards designated latrines or trenches, known as fosses, located in specific courtyards or far-flung corners of the grounds. The air in these areas is thick with the sharp, unmistakable odor of human life, a smell that no amount of courtly perfume could ever truly mask. It is a stark, earthy reality, a daily ritual that grounds the ethereal splendor of the palace in the simple, messy truth of existence. Once the pot is empty, it must be cleaned with cold water and sand, a scouring process that leaves your hands raw, red, and chapped, especially in the biting cold of winter. With this task complete, the true work of making the palace shine can begin. As the first gray light of dawn begins to filter through the tall, arched windows, it illuminates your next task, the endless, unwinnable war against dust and dirt. This is where the strict hierarchy of the servant world becomes clear. The The newest and lowest ranked servants, often young boys and girls, are assigned the roughest work, scrubbing the stone floors of the courtyards and lesser corridors with stiff, pig-bristle brushes and cold water. If you have a little more experience, you might be assigned to the wooden floors. You are on your hands and knees, the cold of the wood seeping through the thin fabric of your trousers or skirts. You use a harsh lye-based soap and a bucket of frigid water, carried from a pump in a distant courtyard. The lye stings the small cuts and chaps on your hands. The sound of dozens of stiff bristled brushes moving across the wood is a rhythmic, shuffling counterpoint to the growing quiet of the morning, a sound of collective toil. After the scrubbing comes the waxing. The smell of beeswax and turpentine fills the air, a clean, sharp scent that momentarily cuts through the other odors of the palace. The wax is applied with thick cloths, and then comes the most strenuous part, the polishing. This is an arm-aching, back-breaking task, rubbing and rubbing in rhythmic, circular motions to slowly coax a deep, reflective gleam from the wood. In the grandest spaces, like the Hall of Mirrors or the state apartments, servants would strap blocks wrapped in felt to their feet and skate across the floors for hours, their own body weight providing the pressure needed to achieve that famous, flawless shine. It is a strange, shuffling dance of pure labor, performed in an empty hall that will soon be filled with the most powerful people in France. They are polishing a mirror that will reflect a world they can never join. If you are a more trusted servant, a fille de chambre or a junior valet, your domain is the furniture and the objects. You are entrusted with the war against dust and tarnish. Versailles is a universe of surfaces, a quantum realm of intricate detail. Imagine yourself with a soft linen cloth and a feather duster in hand, standing before an immense, gilded console table. Its legs are not simple posts. They are carved into twisting, ornate scrolls of acanthus leaves, mythical beasts, and floral garlands. Your job is to dust every single curve, every leaf, every crevice. You trace the path of the carving with your cloth, over and over, gently, meticulously. A small slip, a moment of carelessness, could chip the delicate gesso beneath the gold leaf, a crime that would surely cost you your position. The fear lends a precision to your movements. You move from the table to a massive, ornate picture frame, its surface a riot of carved flowers and cherubs. You dust each wooden petal, each rounded cheek of the putty. Then you move to the boiserie, the intricately carved wooden paneling on the walls, and then to the legs of a chair, curved and delicate, and then to the base of a heavy silver candelabra. You use your feather duster, its plume of goose or turkey feathers ideal for flicking dust from the most delicate surfaces, but this mostly just moves the dust from one place to another. So you follow with a slightly damp cloth, trapping the grime. The work is a meditation in repetition, a physical mantra. One gilded leaf, then the next. 100, 1,000 more, stretching out before you in an endless, gleaming forest of ornamentation. Other servants are assigned to the metals. They sit with trays of silver candlesticks, snuff boxes, and cutlery, polishing each piece with a fine abrasive powder like Tripoli or chalk mixed with alcohol. The metallic scent of the polish clings to their fingers. They rub and rub with a soft chamois leather until the silver is bright and free of tarnish, a reflection of their own tired face staring back at them. The same process is applied to the brass fittings on furniture, the andirons in the fireplaces, the locks and hinges on the doors. Every surface must gleam. And then there are the textiles. Versailles was draped in fabric. Immense tapestries from the Gobelins or Beauvais workshops, depicting mythological scenes, covered entire walls. Heavy velvet curtains, lined with silk, framed the towering windows. Silk damask covered the walls of the most important bedchambers. These were magnets for dust. Periodically, these heavy items would be taken down. a task requiring several strong men standing on tall, unstable ladders and hauled into a courtyard. There they would be hung over lines and beaten with long, flexible sticks. The air would fill with a thick cloud of dust, a choking fog of a year's worth of accumulated grime. Skin cells, pollen, powder from wigs, food particles, soot. You would breathe it in, cough it out, your face and clothes covered in a gray film. It was hard, unpleasant work, but essential to maintaining the vibrant colors of the fabrics. Afterwards came the painstaking task of rehanging the tapestry, ensuring it was perfectly straight and level. The windows themselves were another colossal undertaking. Hundreds of panes of glass, each needing to be spotless. You would stand on a ladder, a bucket of vinegar water beside you, wiping the glass with linen cloths until it was free of streaks, providing a perfect view of the gardens for the courtiers, a view you would only ever see through the filter of your labor. Simultaneously, fires must be lit in hundreds of fireplaces. The palace in winter was a notoriously cold and drafty place. Servants, often young boys known as portbutches, log carriers, haul baskets of heavy oak logs up endless flights of stairs. Their backs ache with the strain, their breath coming in ragged plumes in the frigid air of the service corridors. They kneel on the cold marble hearths, sweeping out the old ashes, their faces and hands becoming smudged with soot. They carefully lay the new fire, the tinder, the kindling, the smaller logs, the larger ones, a precise art they must master. Then they coax the flames to life with a bellows, the soft whoosh of the air, a gentle sound in the quiet room. This fire is not for their warmth. They will soon leave the room and return to the cold passages. It is for the comfort of a duke who will stand before it for a moment before breakfast, or a princess who will have her morning chocolate beside its welcoming glow. Once the fire is roaring, their job is not done. They must return throughout the day to tend it, to add more logs, to ensure it never dies out, a constant circling duty. Throughout all of this, there is an overarching rule that governs your every move, a rule more important than any other: silence. You do not speak unless spoken to by a superior, and even then, your answers are brief and quiet. Yes, monsieur, or at once, madame. You do not laugh. You do not hum. You do not whisper to your fellow servants as you work side by side. The palace is meant to appear as if it runs itself, a magical place of effortless perfection, animated by an unseen force. Your labor is the secret ingredient, and your silence is the spell that maintains the illusion. The only sounds are the sounds of the work itself, the soft whisk of the duster, the rhythmic scrub of the brush, the distant crackle of a new fire, the whisper of your feet on the polished wood. If you sneeze, you stifle it. If you trip, you right yourself without a sound. This silence is part of a larger, unwritten code of social invisibility. You are to be seen only when required and heard not at all. You learn the art of becoming part of the wallpaper, of melting into the background, of turning your body into an object. If a noble or, heaven forbid, a member of the royal family should enter a room or walk down a corridor where you are working, you are to cease all motion instantly. You press yourself flat against the wall, your eyes fixed on the floor, your body utterly still. You do not exist. You are a statue, a piece of furniture that breathes. You hold your breath, listening to the rustle of their silk and the soft tap of their heeled shoes on the floor. You wait for their scent, a cloud of orange blossom, musk, or violet, to envelop you and then fade as they pass. Only when they are gone, when the corridor is empty again, do you allow yourself to exhale and resume your task. To be noticed is a terrifying prospect. A compliment on your work from your direct superior, the gouvernante or the chef de goblet, might mean a slightly better task tomorrow, a tiny step up the ladder from scrubbing floors to dusting furniture. But a glance of irritation from a high-ranking courtier, perhaps because your cleaning bucket was in their way, or they heard you cough, or you failed to efface yourself quickly enough, could mean disaster. It could mean a harsh reprimand, a docking of your meager pay, or, worst of all, dismissal. And dismissal from Versailles was not merely losing a job. It was being cast out from the center of the world, a place of relative security with a roof over your head and bread in your belly, into a wilderness of poverty and uncertainty. Your life is a quiet rhythm of duty, a constant, flowing river of small, repetitive tasks that, when combined by the thousandfold, create the magnificent illusion of Versailles. While you dust and polish, other worlds of labor are churning. Deep in the bowels of the palace, the kitchens, the grand commune, are a roaring inferno of controlled chaos. The heat is immense, the air thick with the smells of roasting meat, baking bread, simmering stocks, and coal smoke. Here, silence is not the rule. It is a place of shouting orders, of clanging copper pots and pans, of the rhythmic thud of cleavers on massive wooden blocks worn smooth with use. Scores of cooks, scullery maids, and spit-turners work in a frantic, orchestrated dance, their faces slick with sweat. Elsewhere, in the laundry, is a vision of steam and sweat. Women with strong, reddened arms stand over enormous copper vats of boiling water, stirring priceless linens with long wooden paddles. They scrub tablecloths, bed-sheets, and delicate chemises on washboards, their hands permanently red and raw from the harsh lye soap. The air is humid and smells of wet cloth and bleach. Afterwards, the items are pressed with heavy, solid irons heated on a stove, a dangerous and exhausting job that requires immense strength and concentration. By now, the sun is up, and the palace is beginning to stir. The nobles are waking, and a new phase of your day begins. If you are a footman or laquais, you are now on display. Your job is to be a silent, handsome ornament. You stand for hours, motionless, at the door of an apartment or behind your master's chair at breakfast. You run errands, carrying messages on silver trays. The messages are folded and sealed. You never know their contents, whether it is a summons to the king, a lover's note, or a spy's report. You are a vessel, nothing more. The boredom is immense, a physical weight. You learn to empty your mind, to focus on a point on the wall opposite you, to enter a state of suspended animation until you are needed. You see the subtle glances, the flickers of emotion on the faces of the courtiers, but your own face must remain a perfect blank mask. If you are a fille de chambre, a chambermaid, you assist your mistress with her elaborate toilette. You help her into her corset, lacing it so tightly she can barely breathe. You arrange the dozens of petticoats and the heavy silk gown. You fetch her powders, her rouges, her perfumes. You hold the mirror while she applies her patches, the small black dots of velvet or silk used to accentuate her features or hide a blemish. You are in a position of incredible intimacy, seeing the great lady without her finery, hearing her private complaints and gossip, but the social chasm between you is absolute. You are a pair of hands, an attentive silence. One wrong word, one flicker of judgment in your eyes, and you could be cast out. The highest-ranking male servants are the valets de chambre. To be a valet to the king himself, or a high-ranking prince, was the pinnacle of a servant's career. These men were privy to the most secret moments of their masters' lives. They were figures of immense, albeit invisible, power within the servant world. They oversaw the other servants of the chamber, controlled access to their master, and often knew his secrets. But even their existence was one of constant vigilance and deference, a high-wire act of service and silence. Your life is one of thousands, a tiny, essential cog in a machine of unimaginable scale and complexity. As the sun finally climbs high enough to stream through the grand windows you have just finished cleaning, illuminating the dust motes still dancing in the air, you are already weary. Your back aches from bending, your knees are sore from kneeling, your scalp itches beneath your wig, and your hands sting from the harsh soaps. And the day is not even halfway through. There will be meals to serve, more errands to run, thousands of candles to be lit in the approaching dusk, and beds to be turned down in a few hours. Your world is one of aching feet, of hands calloused and chapped, of a mind dulled by monotony, and of the ever-present bone-deep knowledge that you are living in the margins of splendor, a silent, breathing ghost in the most glorious house in the world. We have spent some time in the cold, dark corridors of the servants' world, feeling the ache in our bones and the constant, quiet pressure of invisibility. We have smelled the lye soap and the damp stone, and understood that life at Versailles was, for most of its inhabitants, one of unending toil. But to understand this world of silent, ceaseless labor, to grasp why thousands of lives were dedicated to the polishing of a floor or the dusting of a gilded leaf, one must look to the man at its very center. The man for whom this entire universe was created, the axis upon which every life in the palace turned. We must turn our attention to the sun around which the planet of Versailles revolved, King Louis XIV. To understand the man and the palace he built, we must first travel back to his childhood, to a time before the gilded splendor, a time of fear and chaos. Louis was not born into a world of perfect order and absolute control. Quite the opposite. His youth was defined by a period of profound insecurity and civil unrest known as the Fronde. This was a series of civil wars that convulsed France, where powerful nobles, including his own cousins like the Grand Condé, resentful of the growing power of the monarchy and its chief minister, the Italian-born Cardinal Mazarin, rose up in rebellion. Imagine a young boy, not yet a teenager, but already a king by title. Imagine him living in the old Louvre Palace in Paris, a city that simmered with discontent. The air was thick with rumor and sedition. He would have heard the sounds of mobs in the streets, the erection of barricades, the distant, sharp crack of musket fire. This was his reality. In one famous, humiliating incident, a Parisian mob, suspicious that the royal family was planning to flee the city, broke into the Louvre. They surged through the corridors, their faces illuminated by torches, their voices a threatening rumble. They demanded to see their king. They came into his own bedchamber. Louis, under the instruction of his mother, the regent and of Austria, had to pretend to be sound asleep as the common people of Paris, his subjects, filed past his bed, peering at him by candlelight to ensure their king was still there, a captive in his own home. Think of the psychological impact of such a moment. The violation of his private space, the sense of being a powerless pawn, the raw force of the mob, and the utter weakness of his own authority. This was not an abstract political lesson. It was a deeply personal, terrifying one. On another occasion, in the depths of winter, he and his mother were forced to flee the city in the dead of night. Imagine the cold carriage, the jolting ride over frozen roads, the fear of pursuit, the whispered, anxious conversations of the adults around him. They became fugitives in their own kingdom, their safety dependent on the loyalty of a few. He experienced the deep humiliation of seeing his authority openly challenged, his safety threatened, and his own mother subjected to the arrogant demands of rebellious aristocrats who believed their own power was equal to, if not greater than, the crown's. These experiences carved themselves deep into the young king's psyche. He learned a fundamental lesson, that the French nobility, if left to their own devices, with their independent wealth, their regional loyalties, and their ancestral castles, were a source of perpetual chaos. Their pride, their ambition, and their capacity for violence were a direct danger to the stability of the kingdom and to his own life. The Fronde was not just a political crisis for Louis, it was a formative personal trauma. It instilled in him a lifelong distrust of Paris, a city that had betrayed him, and a powerful, unyielding resolve that he would never, ever be that vulnerable again. He would construct a system so complete and so absolute that no noble would ever dare to challenge him. The rest of his life would be a reaction to these early years of fear. Upon the death of his chief minister, Cardinal Mazarin, in 1661, the 22-year-old Louis stunned the court by announcing that he would henceforth rule without a chief minister. He would be his own man in absolute control. This was the first definitive step in the creation of his new system. All of his subsequent actions, his entire reign, can be seen as an elaborate, magnificent, and ultimately successful answer to the chaos of the Fronde. He decided he would not just rule France, he would domesticate it. He would tame the powerful nobles, not by crushing them all on the battlefield, a messy and uncertain business, but by transforming them from semi-independent warlords into dependent courtiers. And his primary tool for this transformation was the palace we now know as Versailles. Before Louis, Versailles was a modest hunting lodge, a rustic brick and stone retreat built by his father, Louis XIII. It was a place to escape the formalities of court, not to embody them. The seat of power was Paris, in the grand but aging Louvre Palace. But Paris, for Louis, held memories of rebellion, mobs, and humiliation. He envisioned something different. He would take this relatively blank canvas, set upon swampy, unpromising land, and build a world entirely of his own making. The choice of the site was itself an act of will. To build his palace here required immense feats of engineering, diverting rivers and draining marshland. For decades, the area was a vast, muddy construction site, employing tens of thousands of laborers and soldiers. The noise of hammers and saws, the smell of fresh-cut stone and damp earth filled the air. This monumental effort was not without its human cost. Accidents were common, and disease spread through the workers' camps. This grim reality was the unseen foundation upon which the glittering palace was built. The project was a testament to his ambition, a statement. Just as he could bend nature to his will, he could bend the nature of the French aristocracy. Versailles was therefore conceived with a dual purpose. Outwardly, it was a breathtaking spectacle of French power and artistry, designed to awe foreign dignitaries and rival monarchs. Its scale, its opulence, the sheer, unapologetic grandeur of its architecture, its gardens, its art, all of it was a carefully crafted piece of political propaganda. He brought together the greatest talents in France, architect Louis Levauve, landscape architect André Lenotre, and painter-decorator Charles Lebrun, and orchestrated their work like a general commanding an army. The recurring motif of Apollo, the sun god, was everywhere, in sculptures, in paintings, on gates. This was no subtle hint. Louis was declaring himself the Sun King, the radiant heart of France, around whom everything and everyone else must orbit. It was a message to the world. France is the center of civilization, and I am its son. But its inward purpose was far more subtle and far more critical to his power. Versailles was designed to be a gilded cage. Louis implemented a simple, brilliant strategy. He required all the high-ranking nobles of France, the dukes, the princes, the counts, to leave their ancestral castles, the very sources of their regional power and influence. They were to come live with him at court. They traded their spacious, fortified chateaux for what were often little more than a few small, dark rooms, located up narrow staircases, poorly heated and filled with the noise and smoke of the palace. A great duke might find his family's grand country estate, with its hundreds of rooms and thousands of acres, exchanged for a cramped apartment at Versailles, where the smoke from his neighbor's fireplace often filled his own chambers, and the noise of a party one floor below went on all night. To refuse this invitation was unthinkable. To be absent from Versailles was to be absent from the king's favor, and to be absent from his favor was to be a political nobody. It meant no access to royal pensions, which became essential for survival at court. It meant no prestigious military appointments for your sons, no advantageous marriages for your daughters to other powerful families, no lucrative government positions. The king was the sole dispenser of patronage, and to receive it you had to be seen. And so they came. The very dukes and princes whose fathers had waged war against the crown now vied for the honor of living under the king's roof, their ancestral pride traded for a chance at royal notice. But living at Versailles was not a life of leisure. It was a life of constant, unrelenting performance, governed by a complex and rigid system of etiquette so detailed it dictated every moment of the day. And at the heart of this system, the keystone of the entire structure, were the king's own daily rituals. He transformed his very life, waking, eating, sleeping, into a series of public theatrical performances in which the nobility were compelled to participate. Let us return to that most famous of these rituals, the lever, the king's rising ceremony. We have seen how it functioned as a daily roll call of favor. The ceremony was divided into multiple, distinct stages, each a finer sieve of status. The autre familier allowed only the king's immediate family. Then came the grande autre for the great officers of the crown and chamber. Following that, the premier autre for other high officials and favored nobles. Finally, the autre de la chamber admitted a larger, but still select, crowd. To have the right to one of these autres was the consuming ambition of a courtier's life, a privilege that was jealously guarded and endlessly sought. But the performance did not end when the king was dressed. It was merely the first act. After the lever, the king would proceed from his bedroom, through the Hall of Mirrors, to the Royal Chapel to attend daily Massachusetts. This was another public procession. The corridors would be lined with courtiers and petitioners. This was the moment for someone who could not gain access to the lever to try and catch the king's eye. They might hold up a petition, a folded piece of paper detailing a request. The king would often take them, not reading them, but handing them to an aide. The simple act of the king taking your paper was a victory, a sign that you had been noticed. He moved through this crowd with a practiced, majestic grace, his face an impassive mask. He knew he was being watched, and his every gesture was calculated. The Mass itself was a performance of piety. The king knelt in his royal gallery, in full view of the court assembled below. His devotion was a model for the kingdom. It reinforced his divine right to rule, reminding everyone that he was not just a political leader, but God's chosen representative on earth. After Mass came the work of ruling. The king would hold council meetings with his ministers. But even this was followed by another ritual, the public dinner known as the grand couvert. Imagine the scene. The king, often accompanied by the queen and other senior royals, sits at a table laden with silver-gilt dishes. He is alone at one side of the table, facing outwards. An audience of courtiers stands and watches him eat. They do not speak. They simply observe. To be allowed to stand in the room during the grand couvert was another honor. A servant would announce the course, another would bring the dish, a third would present it, a fourth would serve it. The meal was a ballet of service, every movement precise and choreographed. The king ate with a hearty appetite, a sign of his vigor and health, which were, by extension, the vigor and health of the kingdom itself. For the courtiers watching, it was another chance to be seen, another tedious but necessary hour in the unending performance of court life. The afternoons were for recreation, but even recreation was a political tool. The king might go hunting, a passion he inherited from his father. This was a virile, martial activity, and an invitation to join the royal hunt was a coveted sign of favor. The nobles would thunder through the forests of Versailles on horseback, their elaborate hunting coats a flash of color against the trees. It was a display of aristocratic energy, but an energy entirely channeled and controlled by the king. Alternatively, the king might take a promenade in his magnificent gardens. Here, too, the courtiers would follow. The gardens themselves were an expression of his power. Designed by Lenotre, they were not a wild natural landscape. They were a triumph of order over nature. Geometric patterns, perfectly clipped hedges, terraces, canals, and hundreds of fountains all worked in concert. The fountains were an engineering marvel, their water pumped from the Seine at great expense. They would only be turned on when the king was approaching a certain part of the garden, a system that required a network of servants with whistles to signal his movements. To walk with the king in his gardens was to walk through a landscape that mirrored his own mind, ordered, rational, and completely under his control. The evenings brought yet another form of ritualized gathering, the apartment. Several nights a week, the state apartments, a series of grand, gilded rooms, would be open to the court. These were less formal than a ball, but no less governed by etiquette. Thousands of candles would blaze in the chandeliers, illuminating the painted ceilings. There would be tables for card games, where fortunes were won and lost. There would be music, often provided by the king's court composer Jean-Baptiste Lully. There would be billiards, a game at which the king excelled. And there would be buffets laden with sweetmeats, fruits, and sorbets. It was in this glittering evening world that another key figure in the court's power dynamic held sway, the official royal mistress, the maîtresse en titre. This was a semi-official position of immense influence. The mistress was not just a romantic partner, she was a major political player. She had her own apartments in the palace, her own faction of supporters, and she controlled a vital channel of access to the king. To be in favor with the mistress was often as important as being in favor with the king himself. During the height of Versailles' splendor, this role was held by the formidable Françoise Athénaise de Roquecourt de Mortemart, better known as the Marquise de Montespan. She was beautiful, witty, and fiercely intelligent, and for over a decade she was the unofficial queen of Versailles. Her apartments were the center of a sparkling social world, and her favor could make or break a courtier's career. The competition for her attention was as intense as the competition for the king's. This added yet another layer of intrigue, jealousy, and calculation to the already complex social web of the palace. However, as the king aged, his tastes changed. The flamboyant and demanding Montespan fell from favor, replaced by the pious and discreet Françoise d'Aubigné, the Marquise de Maintenon. She had been the governess to his illegitimate children with Montespan, and after the queen's death, Louis secretly married her. The tone of the court shifted dramatically. The lavish parties of the apartment were scaled back, replaced by a more sober, devout atmosphere. This shift demonstrates just how completely the entire mood and culture of Versailles were a reflection of the king's personal life and evolving character. It would be a mistake, however, to see Louis only as a man obsessed with ceremony and pleasure. He possessed a powerful sense of duty and a formidable work ethic that shamed many of his nobles. He was not a mere ceremonial figurehead who left the tedious work of governance to others. He spent 8 to 10 hours a day in council meetings with his ministers, men like the brilliant finance minister Jean-Baptiste Colbert and the formidable war minister, the Marquis de Louvois. Imagine him away from the public gaze, in a more soberly decorated council chamber. The flamboyant silk coat is exchanged for a more practical garment. The impassive public mask is replaced by a look of intense concentration. Here he was not a performer but a chief executive. He personally read diplomatic dispatches, reviewed military plans, and scrutinized budget proposals. He had a memory for detail that was both legendary and terrifying to his ministers. He could recall a specific clause in a treaty from years earlier, or question a figure in a column of accounts. This diligence was the iron fist inside the velvet glove of ceremony. The courtiers knew that this was not a man who could be easily deceived or outmaneuvered. His absolute authority was not just based on the divine right he claimed, it was earned through relentless daily effort. Even his physical body was an instrument of state. He projected an image of robust health and vigor, but he suffered from a host of painful ailments throughout his life. He endured excruciating dental problems that resulted in the removal of most of his upper teeth and part of his palate, an operation performed without anesthetic. He also suffered from a painful anal fistula, which was surgically treated in a groundbreaking and highly risky procedure. The entire court held its breath during his recovery. His survival and return to health were treated as a national triumph, further cementing the idea that the king's body and the body politic were one and the same. This desire for control extended to the very culture of his nation. Louis understood the power of art as propaganda. He weaponized culture to enhance his own glory and that of France. He founded academies for painting, sculpture, architecture, and science, all aimed at establishing French standards of excellence. The theater flourished under his patronage. Playwrights like Molière, who satirized the follies of society, and Racine, who wrote tragedies of stark, classical power, created their masterpieces for the court. The composer Lully created a new form, the French opera, a lavish spectacle of music, dance, and stagecraft that always, in some way, glorified the king. This cultural dominance, this soft power, was another form of his absolutism. He made French the international language of diplomacy and high culture, French fashion the standard for every court in Europe, and French art the model to be emulated. And so we see the full picture of the system he created. It was a total environment. Every aspect of life, from the moment a noble woke up to the moment they went to sleep, what they wore, how they spoke, what they did for leisure, how they spent their money, was dictated by the king's presence and the rules of his court. He had taken the most dangerous and unruly element of his kingdom, the high nobility, and had successfully neutralized them, not with swords but with etiquette, not with prisons but with a palace. His legacy was one of total control. He had taken the chaotic, fragmented France of his youth and forged it into a powerful, centralized nation with a cohesive national identity. But this came at a cost. The world he built was glittering, but it was also rigid and brittle. It was a system that relied entirely on the force of his own personality and his tireless work ethic. His successors, Louis XV and Louis XVI, would inherit the theater but lack the skill and dedication of the original director. They would maintain the expensive ceremonies without the same political purpose, alienating both the public and the court. He had tamed the nobility, but in doing so, had created a class of people who were largely ornamental, disconnected from the realities of the country they once ruled. They knew the intricacies of court protocol, but they knew little of the changing economic and intellectual currents of the world outside Versailles. This profound disconnect between the glittering, hermetically sealed world of the court and the struggling, evolving nation of France would have profound and devastating consequences in the century that followed. As we picture the Sun King finally getting into his bed, the last courtier bowing his way out of the room, we can understand the immense, intricate web of power that he wove. It was a web that caught everyone, from the highest duke in his silken coat to the lowest chambermaid with her rough, chapped hands. Every polished floor, every silent corridor, was a testament to his obsession with order, his fear of chaos, and his genius for control. The entire palace, in all its splendor and all its hardship, in its public ceremonies and its hidden passages, was a reflection of the mind of this one extraordinary, formidable man. We have walked the cold floors with the servants and stood in the tense, gilded rooms with the courtiers, understanding the two opposing forces that defined Versailles, the invisible labor and the hypervisible ceremony. But there is another layer to this immense and complex place, a layer that existed between these two worlds, a secret geography of hidden spaces, quiet passageways, and unwritten rules that form the true nervous system of the palace. This is the world of the whispering walls. The palace that Louis XIV presented to the world was a masterpiece of symmetry, logic, and grandeur. Its grand axes and formal enfilades, the series of rooms with doorways aligned to create a long, impressive vista, were designed to impress and to control movement, to create clear and public lines of sight. This was architecture as political statement, rational, ordered, and entirely under the king's gaze. But behind this formal facade, woven into the very fabric of the building, was a second secret palace. A network of private apartments, hidden staircases, concealed doors, and discreet corridors. Imagine the palace as a living organism. The grand halls and state apartments, the hall of mirrors, the salons of war and peace, are its beautiful, visible skeleton, the strong and impressive framework. But this other network of passages forms its circulatory system, the hidden veins and arteries through which the true private life of the court flowed unseen. For us, as servants, these passages are a workplace necessity. We have already walked some of them in the pre-dawn darkness. They are called the deroulements or the degagements. They are narrow, they are dark, they are utilitarian. The walls are plain, rough plaster, not adorned with silk or gold leaf. The floors are stone or bare wooden planks, not polished parquet laid in intricate patterns. There are no windows. The only light comes from the occasional tallow candle sputtering in a wall sconce, its greasy smoke leaving dark, teardrop-shaped smudges on the ceiling above. The air is cool and still, carrying the faint smells of damp, dust, old wax, and the lingering aroma of yesterday's cooking that has seeped through from the distant kitchens. These are the corridors that allow the magic of Versailles to happen. They are the logistical network that allows a footman to appear with a message on a silver tray as if from nowhere, or a multi-course meal to arrive piping hot at a noble's table. They run behind the grand apartments, above the frescoed ceilings of the staterooms, and below the polished floors. A servant could traverse nearly the entire length of the palace, from the kitchens in the basement of one wing to a noble's attic apartment in another, without ever being seen by a member of the court. This was the unwritten etiquette of not being seen, a crucial part of the palace's daily theater. Your existence was a behind-the-scenes reality, and these corridors were your domain. You learned to navigate them by touch and memory, the specific curve of a staircase, the texture of a wall, the way a certain floorboard creaked underfoot. But these passages were not just for the servants. They were also the conduits for another kind of secret life, the private affairs of the king and his court. They were the architecture of intimacy and intrigue. Let us explore one of the most famous of these hidden networks, the one connecting to the king's private apartments, his petit apartment du roi. While the state apartments were for public display and the performance of power, these were his private refuge. Located on the first and second floors overlooking the marble courtyard, these were smaller, more intimate rooms, still exquisitely decorated with masterpieces of art and marquetry, but designed for comfort and privacy rather than for overwhelming spectacle. Here, the king could relax, meet with his family, or work with his most trusted ministers away from the prying eyes of the general court. And leading to and from these rooms was a labyrinth of secret staircases and corridors. Picture a beautifully paneled wall in one of the king's private studies. The room is a marvel of craftsmanship, the walls covered in polished wood inlaid with intricate patterns. To the casual observer, it is a solid wall. But if you know where to press, on a specific carved flower or a subtle joint in the paneling, a section of the wall swings inward without a sound, perfectly counterbalanced. It reveals a dark, narrow opening. This is the entrance to a hidden staircase. Imagine stepping through. The gilded, sunlit room vanishes, and you are plunged into a different world. The staircase is a tight spiral, the steps of worn wood or stone. It is steep and claustrophobic. As you descend, the air grows colder. You are literally inside the walls of the palace. You might hear the muffled sound of a conversation from an adjoining room, or the faint strains of a harpsichord, but the sounds are distant, ghostly, their sources hard to place. You are in the in-between space. These secret stairs served a vital purpose for the king. They allowed him to move about his palace with a freedom that his public life denied him. Most famously, they allowed him to visit his mistresses without the prying eyes and whispered commentary of the court. The apartment of the official royal mistress, whether it was the Marquise de Montespan or later, the Marquise de Maintenon, was always connected to the king's own private quarters by such a hidden route. A secret staircase would lead from his chambers directly to hers, sometimes emerging behind a heavy tapestry, through a false back in a large wardrobe, or through a hidden door in a small private closet. This allowed the king to come and go as he pleased, especially late at night, long after the formal coucher ceremony had ended and the courtiers had dispersed to their own apartments. These were the paths of intimacy, shortcuts through the rigid formality of the court. They were a physical manifestation of the dual nature of the king's life: the public monarch, a living symbol of the state, and the private man, with his own emotional needs and desires. For a courtier, to know the location of these passages was to possess dangerous, valuable knowledge. It was to understand the true emotional and political map of the palace, which often diverged from the official one. To see a minister emerge from a private staircase near the king's study suggested a level of trust and influence far beyond that of his peers who waited in the antechambers. The nobles, too, sought to create their own pockets of privacy in this overwhelmingly public space. The apartments they were assigned in the palace were often small and poorly laid out. An ambitious duke or duchess would spend a fortune petitioning for and then creating their own private spaces. They would build small mezzanines above their official rooms, creating what were known as entresols. These were low-ceilinged, cozy spaces, often furnished with comfortable chairs and small tables, perfect for private conversations, quiet liaisons, or simply escaping the relentless public performance of the court. Access to these spaces was often via a small, easily hidden spiral staircase, tucked away in a corner or behind a screen. These hidden rooms became the settings for much of the court's intrigue. Here, political alliances were forged and plots were hatched. Secrets were whispered that could never be spoken in the grand, echoing halls. Marriages were arranged and reputations were ruined. The walls of these small rooms, if they could talk, would tell a more honest history of Versailles than any official record. These were the spaces where the carefully constructed masks of courtly life could be set aside, and true ambitions and animosities revealed. There is a sense of mystery that clings to these hidden spaces. One of the most intriguing and shadowy events in the history of Versailles, the affair of the poisons, relied heavily on this secret geography. This was a major scandal in the late 1670s that implicated some of the highest-ranking members of the court, including the king's mistress, Madame de Montespan, in a dark world of witchcraft, black masses, and assassination plots. Imagine a noblewoman, consumed by jealousy or ambition, desperate to win a lover or dispose of a rival. She would not conduct such business in the Hall of Mirrors. Instead, she would slip away from the evening's festivities, the sound of Lully's orchestra fading behind her. Under the cover of darkness, her face hidden by a hood and cloak, she would make her way through the maze of courtyards and back passages to the darker corners of the palace or the nearby town of Versailles. There, in a dimly lit room that smelled of strange herbs and burning charcoal, she might meet with a fortune-teller or an alchemist, figures like the infamous Catherine Monvoisin, known as La Voisin. La Voisin and others like her operated on the fringes of society, offering a range of services to the desperate and powerful. They promised love potions, powders to ensure a husband's fidelity, or, more sinisterly, substances to discreetly remove an inconvenient person from the picture. These concoctions, known as powders of succession, were often compounds of arsenic, lead, or other toxic materials. The transactions, the delivery of these dangerous substances, would have relied on the palace's hidden infrastructure. A trusted lady's maid, who knew the servants' corridors as well as her own name, could slip a small, unmarked packet to her mistress during a quiet moment. A secret meeting could be arranged in an unused storage room or a secluded grotto in the vast gardens. The very architecture of the palace, with its countless nooks, crannies, and hidden routes, facilitated this dark underworld of superstition and crime. The affair of the poisons sent a shockwave of fear and paranoia through the court. The king established a special tribunal, the Chamber Ardente or Burning Court, to investigate. The testimony revealed a terrifying underbelly of superstition and ruthless ambition beneath the polished surface of courtly life. Arrests were made, and some were even executed or exiled. The scandal touched the very highest levels of the aristocracy, proving that behind the elegant facade and practiced smiles, the court was a place of deep-seated passions and dangerous rivalries. The whispering walls had finally spoken, and their stories were of a world far removed from the sunlit ideal Louis sought to project. The investigation was eventually shut down by the king himself, likely because the trail of evidence was leading uncomfortably close to Madame de Montespan, and by extension to the throne itself. The secrets were forced back behind the walls. Even beyond illicit affairs and criminal plots, the secret corridors served a more mundane, but equally important, function. They were zones of relative freedom and efficiency. In these cramped, unadorned spaces, the rigid rules of etiquette were momentarily relaxed. Two footmen, passing each other on a dark spiral staircase, might exchange a quick, whispered complaint about their master, or share a piece of bread, a shared moment of humanity impossible in the grand staterooms. A chambermaid might pass a note to a guardsman, a fleeting, private connection in a world of public scrutiny. These passages were where the real gossip of the palace, the below-stairs intelligence network, thrived. Servants saw and heard everything. They knew who was in debt, who was having an affair, who had received a cold glance from the king. This information was a form of currency, traded and exchanged in the quiet moments in these hidden spaces. These were the places where the mask could slip, if only for an instant. The immense psychological pressure of life at Versailles, for both servant and noble, required such safety valves. The hidden passageways were not just architectural features, they were essential to the emotional and social functioning of the palace. They allowed for the quiet transactions, the private griefs, the secret loves, and the simmering resentments that the formal world of the court could not contain. They were the palace's subconscious mind, a repository of all that was hidden, suppressed, or forbidden. Imagine a specific, poignant example. A young noblewoman, forced into a political marriage with a much older duke, finds herself desperately unhappy. In the public spaces of the court, she must maintain a perfect facade of contentment. She smiles, she dances, she plays her part. But her apartment has a small, hidden door that leads to a service staircase. Late at night, she might slip out and climb to a small, unused attic room, a space that technically belongs to the servants' quarters but is currently empty. There, by the light of a single candle, looking out a small dormer window at the moonlit rooftops, she can finally allow her tears to fall. She can be herself, away from the thousand judging eyes of the court. This hidden space gives her a precious, fleeting moment of solitude and authentic emotion. Or consider a minister of state leaving a tense council meeting with the king. He needs a moment to compose himself before facing the throng of petitioners waiting outside. He knows of a short connecting passage that runs behind the council chamber. He slips through a discreet door and stands for a moment in the cool darkness, taking a deep breath, marshaling his thoughts, before re-emerging into the public glare with a calm and confident expression. The passage has served as a psychological airlock, allowing him to transition from one demanding role to another. And so, as we imagine ourselves walking these secret paths, feeling the rough plaster of the walls and hearing the echo of our own quiet footsteps, we gain a more complete understanding of Versailles. It was not a single monolithic entity. It was a place of layers, of public fronts and private realities. The whisper of silk in a grand gallery, the clatter of a pot in a distant kitchen, and the hushed, urgent voice in a hidden corridor were all part of the same complex symphony. The true life of the palace was lived in the interplay between these different worlds, in the constant movement between the seen and the unseen. The walls of Versailles did not just hold up the roof. They held 1,000 secrets, and it was in these secrets that the true human heart of this extraordinary place beat, hidden away from the sun. We have spent our journey in the shadows, with the servants in their cold attics and dark corridors, and exploring the secret passages hidden within the palace walls. Now, for our final segment, let us step fully into the light. Let us emerge from behind the heavy brocade curtain and join the world that all this sweat and secrecy was designed to support. Let us imagine for a time that we are not the servants but the masters. We are not the polishers of the floor but the reflection in its brilliant surface. We are now at the very top of the Versailles food chain. We are a duke, a duchess, a high-ranking courtier in the intimate orbit of the Sun King. Our day does not begin with the cold, jarring clang of an iron bell, but with the soft, almost imperceptible rustle of silk as our personal valet or lady's maid draws back the heavy curtains of our canopied bed. Sunlight, filtered through tall, clean windows, streams into the room, illuminating the dancing dust motes that are the only evidence of the servants who have already come and gone. The first sensation is not the shock of a cold stone floor, but the gentle warmth of a fire that has already been expertly lit in our hearth by an unseen hand. The air is not thin and damp, but thick with the scent of last night's perfume, the lingering sweetness of the beeswax candles that were extinguished only a few hours ago, and perhaps the fragrance of fresh flowers, delivered to our rooms that morning from the king's own hothouses. We do not dress ourselves in coarse, itchy wool. Instead, we are a living doll, a passive figure attended to by a team of specialist servants. Our valets help us into a fine linen shirt, soft as a cloud against the skin, and a silk dressing gown known as an indienne, patterned with exotic, hand-painted flowers from the Far East. Our morning does not begin with a crust of hard, dark bread, but with a delicate and private ritual. A servant enters, bowing low, carrying a silver tray. On it sits a cup of steaming, dark, and impossibly fragrant hot chocolate, or perhaps coffee. These were exotic, fashionable beverages, symbols of wealth and a sophisticated palate. The chocolate is thick, spiced with cinnamon or vanilla, and served in a delicate porcelain cup from the Sèvres manufactory. We sip it slowly while our senior servant, our gentilhomme de la chambre, informs us of the day's schedule, which royal ceremony to attend, which invitations have arrived for the evening's entertainment, what gossip is circulating from the lesser apartments. This is vital intelligence. Knowing who is rising in favor and who is falling is key to our own survival. The process of dressing, the toilette, is a lengthy and public affair. Unlike the king's lever, ours is not a state ceremony, but it is a social one, a chance to hold court in our own small way. Friends and favorite acquaintances might be invited to sit and chat while we are powdered, coiffed, and painted. For a lady, this is a complex construction. The corset, made of whalebone and stiffened linen, is laced painfully tight, creating the fashionable silhouette of a narrow waist and high, uplifted bust. Breathing becomes a shallow, conscious effort. Then come the layers of petticoats, the panniers or side hoops that extend the width of the hips to as much as 6 feet, and finally a magnificent gown. It is made of shimmering silk brocade or heavy velvet, intricately embroidered with silver and gold thread, and weighing a considerable amount. Her hair is a towering creation, styled by a professional coiffeur, who might spend 2 hours building the elaborate structure of curls and poofs over a wire frame. It is then powdered gray or white with fine starch, and perhaps adorned with ribbons, pearls, feathers, or even more fantastical objects, small model ships, cages with tiny birds, or miniature pastoral scenes, depending on the fashion of the moment. For a gentleman, the process is equally elaborate. The silk stockings must be perfectly smooth, without a single wrinkle. The velvet breeches are tied with ribbons at the knee. The lace cravat is a waterfall of delicate fabric, tied in a precise, fashionable knot. Then comes the brocaded waistcoat and the matching long coat, or justacorps, its cuffs wide and heavily embroidered. A sword more decorative than functional, its hilt perhaps jeweled, is buckled at the hip. A fine layer of powder dusts the wig. The final touch is a generous splash of perfume. Personal hygiene, as we know it, was a different concept. Bathing the full body with water and soap was infrequent and often considered unhealthy, believed to open the pores to disease. Instead, cleanliness was approximated by fine linen, which was believed to draw out the body's impurities and was changed daily. Any lingering odors were masked by heavy, expensive perfumes made from animal-derived substances like musk, ambergris, and civet. The air at court was a heady, complex mixture of these powerful scents, mingling with the smell of powder, wax, and hundreds of closely packed bodies. Once dressed, our day is a procession through a series of carefully orchestrated pleasures and obligations. We might attend the King's Mass, our position in the chapel a clear indicator of our status. The goal is simple, to be seen by the King and to see who the King sees. A slight nod in our direction from the monarch is a victory, a topic of conversation for the rest of the day, a small reassurance that our position is secure. Failure to be noticed, or worse, a cold look, could induce a state of near panic. The meals are a centerpiece of court life. The food served is not merely for sustenance. It is a display of power, wealth, and sophisticated taste. We do not eat in a communal hall, but in our own apartments, or as a guest in another's. A dinner party is a chance to display one's influence. The quality of your chef, the rarity of your ingredients, and the beauty of your tableware are all under intense scrutiny. Imagine the table. It is covered in a fine damask cloth, set with porcelain from Sèvres and silver from the finest Parisian artisans. The meal consists of numerous courses, with a bewildering variety of dishes presented at once in a style known as service à la Française. There might be roasted pheasants and partridges, their feathers reattached for a lifelike presentation. There are elaborate meat pies sculpted into fantastic shapes, tureens of rich, creamy soup, jellies shimmering in intricate molds, and dishes of fresh oysters and crayfish brought in on horseback from the coast. The sheer abundance is staggering, a performance of conspicuous consumption. And then there are the desserts. This was an age that adored sugar. The final course is a fantasy of sweetness, candied fruits, nougat, marzipan, and towering pyramids of spun sugar. And the ultimate luxury, sorbet and ice cream. kept frozen in special ice houses packed with blocks of ice cut from ponds in winter and insulated with straw. These frozen treats were a marvel of technology and a symbol of ultimate luxury, a taste of cold in the heat of summer. But even this feast is fraught with social peril. The etiquette of dining is complex. Who is seated where, who is served first, how one uses the fork, a relatively new invention and still used with some suspicion, are all freighted with meaning. Conversation is an art form. It must be witty, elegant, and light. It is a dance of words, full of double meanings, veiled compliments, and subtle insults. To be a bore was a social crime. To be too serious was a sign of provincialism. The goal was to sparkle, to entertain, to flatter, and above all, to gather information. You listen more than you speak, piecing together fragments of conversation to understand the shifting landscape of power. Because beneath the silken surface of this life, a constant, silent war is being waged. It is a war of gossip, intrigue, and social sabotage. Every word we say is weighed and analyzed by those around us. A seemingly innocent compliment can carry a hidden barb. A piece of shared gossip can be a weapon used to damage a rival's reputation. A careless comment made after a little too much wine could be repeated, twisted, and find its way back to the king with disastrous consequences. The fear of falling from favor is a constant, gnawing anxiety that underlies all the splendor. One day you are at the center of the world, invited to the most exclusive parties, your opinion sought, your presence desired. The next, after a perceived slight or a shift in royal affections, you find yourself on the outside. The invitations dry up. Former friends avert their eyes when they see you in the gardens, offering only a curt, formal nod. The silence from the king's circle is deafening. This social death, this disgrace, was, for many, more terrifying than physical death. It was a descent from the sunlit world of Versailles into a cold, dark obscurity, a return to a provincial chateau that now felt like a prison. The afternoon might be spent in a leisurely promenade through the gardens. We walk along the grand terraces, our silk shoes crunching on the gravel paths. We admire the fountains, the statues, the perfectly manicured parterres. But this is no simple stroll. It is another stage for the court's drama. We see who is walking with whom. A lady seen walking with a powerful minister? An alliance may be forming. Two courtiers who were once inseparable now on opposite sides of the Grand Canal? A friendship has fractured. The garden is a living chessboard, and we are all pieces in the game, moving with calculated grace. Or perhaps the afternoon is for gambling. In the opulent salons of the palace, fortunes were won and lost on the turn of a card. Games like lansquenet, basset, and hoka were played for incredibly high stakes. A duke might lose an entire estate in a single evening. This was not just for entertainment. The staggering debts incurred by many nobles made them even more dependent on the king's generosity, on his willingness to grant them a pension or a lucrative post to pay off their gambling losses. The king encouraged this, as it was another tool to keep his aristocracy financially shackled to him. Life at the top of the Versailles food chain was a strange paradox. It was a life of supreme physical comfort, a world where every material need was met by an army of invisible servants. It was a life of dazzling beauty, surrounded by the finest art and architecture. But it was also a life of profound psychological stress. It was a life lived entirely in public, with no room for privacy or genuine, unguarded emotion. It was a life of constant performance, of wearing a mask of cheerful indifference while your mind raced with calculation and anxiety. You would never have to empty a chamber pot, but you would have to spend your life in a state of nervous vigilance. You would never feel the ache of a cold floor on your feet, but you might feel the sting of a cleverly worded insult that you could not answer back. Your wig would be made of the finest human hair, not itchy horsehair, but the pressure to maintain your position, to navigate the treacherous social currents, to please the king, was a weight far heavier than any wig. This was the gilded cage that Louis XIV had so masterfully constructed. He offered the nobility a life of unparalleled luxury, but he stripped them of their true power and independence. He replaced the sword with the witty retort, the battlefield with the ballroom. And in doing so, he created a world that was both a pinnacle of civilization and a prison of protocol, a place where a life could be ruined not by a cannonball, but by a quiet word in the right ear. The endless round of pleasure and ceremony was, in itself, a form of control. It kept the nobles so busy with trivialities, with the pursuit of fashion and favor, that they had no time or energy to conspire against the crown. Their ambition, which had once fueled civil wars, was now channeled into securing a better apartment, an invitation to a royal hunt, or the honor of holding a candlestick. It was a brilliant and deeply cynical system of political emasculation, disguised as a life of endless delight. And so our long journey through the gilded and shadowed halls of Versailles comes to a quiet close. The scent of orange blossom and melting wax begins to fade. The distant echo of a string quartet, the rustle of silk against a polished floor, the murmur of secrets in a darkened corridor, all of it recedes now, growing softer, more distant, until it is nothing more than a gentle memory. We leave behind the world of the court, with all of its brilliant light and its deep, dark corners. We began our night not in the grand staterooms, but in the cold, pre-dawn darkness of a servant's attic. We felt the shock of the frigid stone on our bare feet, the persistent itch of a woolen uniform, the ache in our backs from endless, repetitive labor. We lived for a time in the margins of splendor, a life of silent toil and absolute invisibility, our existence a secret that allowed the magic of the palace to seem effortless. From those shadows, we sought to understand the brilliant, formidable mind of the man who architected this universe, Louis XIV. We saw how his own childhood fears of chaos were transformed into a powerful, unyielding obsession with order. We witnessed him build not just a palace, but a system, a gilded cage where he could tame the proud nobility of France, turning them from threatening warlords into anxious petitioners, their lives governed not by ambition for power, but by a desperate need for his favor. We then slipped away from the public gaze, behind the tapestries and through the paneled walls. We walked the secret corridors and the hidden staircases that formed the palace's hidden heart, the conduits for secrets and sighs. We understood how this secret geography enabled both the quiet efficiency of the staff and the private, often forbidden, affairs of the court. We felt the cool, still air of the in-between places, the arteries through which the true, unfiltered life of Versailles flowed. And finally, we stepped into the glittering, blinding light of the aristocracy. We felt the weight of the silk and the constriction of the corset. We tasted the impossible luxury of the sorbet and heard the sharp edge of a whispered insult disguised as a compliment. We understood the constant, gnawing anxiety that lay beneath the surface of their lives, a world of endless performance and quiet warfare, where social sabotage was a high art, and a fall from favor was a fate worse than death. We have seen that Versailles was never one place, but 1,000, all layered on top of one another. It was a world of public performance built on a foundation of hidden labor. A world of unimaginable luxury sustained by unimaginable hardship. A world of sunlit gardens and shadowy corridors, of spoken pleasantries and unspoken fears. It was a monument to the power of a single will, and a testament to the thousands of human lives, both grand and humble, that were caught in its intricate web. But that world, with all its weight and all its worry, is now a distant echo. It is a story that has been told. Its characters have played their parts, and the curtain has fallen. The great palace is quiet now. The courtiers have dispersed, their anxieties dissolved into dust. The servants have finished their long day's work, and have finally found their rest in the quiet of their cramped rooms. The last candle has been extinguished, one by one, leaving the vast halls to the moonlight and the memories. The gardens are surrendering to the night mists, the fountains silent, the gravel paths empty. The pressures of that world are not yours. You do not have to carry them. There is no king to please, no rigid etiquette to master. There is no social ladder to climb, no rival to outwit. There are no cold floors waiting for your feet, no chamber pots to be emptied before the dawn. There is only the comfort of your own quiet space, the softness of your bed, the gentle weight of your blanket. Let the details of history fade like a dream. Let the names and the dates and the intrigues drift away on a soft and easy tide. They can find their own rest in the pages of the past. All that matters now is the stillness of this moment, the simple, peaceful rhythm of your own slow breath. Allow your thoughts to soften, to lose their sharp edges. Allow the day to recede, to become as distant as the 17th century. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to see. The long day at the palace is over. Allow your mind to grow quiet, to find its own peace in the welcoming darkness. There is only rest now, only calm, only sleep. Sleep well.